I'd like to introduce our panel today. First, Kelly Dodds is currently the Tech Director for Advanced Manufacturing, leading the Advanced Manufacturing Modernization and Technology Organization, and reports to the SAS VP of Operations with a dotted line to the SAS VP of Technology Development and Execution. Kelly and his team are responsible for the strategic planning and development of manufacturing technologies, factory modernization, and industrial engineering initiatives supporting SAS operations. These initiatives span from traditional Six Sigma and Lean to alignment of SAS operations with Industry 4.0 and smart manufacturing and industry transformations. Prior to this, Mr. Dodds was an engineering fellow and the SAS Technology Area Director for Mechanical Materials, Structures, and Manufacturing. Kelly also works to develop university technology engagement and partnership opportunities in manufacturing. Please join me in welcoming Kelly to the stage. Jamal Madry is Boeing's Enterprise Technology Chief Strategist, responsible for architecting the integrated technology strategies and roadmaps at the corporate level, shaping boutique, disruptive technology assessments, and representing engineering, test, and technology for corporate merger and acquisition due diligence activities. Prior to this, Jamal served in a variety of roles over a 5-year period with Boeing Satellite Systems, including program management, global sales and marketing, advanced research and development, prototyping, and software engineering. You have to realize he's only been with the company for 6 years, so this is a lot of activity for 6 years. In addition to his technical responsibilities, Jamal has created and led a number of organizational and employee engagement initiatives. He has also been the recipient of numerous awards. Among these are the IEEE Ada Kappa New Outstanding Young Professional, the SAE Young Industry Leadership Award, and the American Society of Engineers Indian Origin Young Engineer of the Year. In addition, Jamal was invited into the Einstein Society of the United States National Academy of Engineering in 2014. Please welcome Jamal to the stage. And finally, we have Herbert Sims, the Director of Diversity Inclusion for Northrop Grumman Corporation. He supports the aerospace systems sector. Herb is responsible for the implementation and alignment of the company's integrated global diversity and inclusion initiatives, including sustainable development and various global corporate responsibility strategies, supporting their business growth. Herb monitors the sector's diversity reporting, facilitates the Diversity and Inclusion Council, and oversees 12 employee resource groups and manages initiatives designed to foster inclusive workforce behaviors, including coaching and expanding workforce knowledge about diversity and inclusion. Please welcome Herb to the stage. So welcome, everybody. The first question I'll ask each of you to do is describe the diversity and inclusion initiatives at each of your companies and how you're engaged with these practices. So start anywhere.
Well, I'll go. Is it on? Testing. Is it on? Herb Sims, Northrop Grumman. So listen, we have a number, actually we have various programs, but I'll speak to some specific ones that we can discuss. Throughout our enterprise, if you were here earlier when Kevin Mitchell spoke, we have 4 operating sectors within Northrop Grumman family, and in all those sectors we have what we call a Diversity and Inclusion Council, specific to the individual sectors. So I support the aerospace sector, which is comprised of about 25,000 people, and I facilitate one of our D&I councils. We thought it was important to make sure we have a specific D&I council in every one of our sectors to address and understand the dynamics of what's going on in those sectors, where we can implement and institute programs to help specific issues and concerns that may surface. So throughout, when you're dealing with an 84,000 population of workforce, trying to bring them into one alignment. Our goal is to build the best culture at Northrop Grumman, and in order to build that best culture, we have to have our leaders actively involved to help us implement the programs and initiatives that come down from the corporate office. So our D&I councils help facilitate that. So that's just one program. We have what we call small acts of inclusion. And this program we got a huge lift from when we rolled out in 2016. And I like to think of it as just taking us back to our basic manners in the workplace, just having people do the simple things to help foster a more inclusive environment by simply speaking to your peers on a daily basis, by showing a level of respect in meetings. So we actually published a document with our Small Acts of Inclusion program that says this is how you run not only an effective meeting, but a meeting that engages and includes everyone. At the end of the day, people want to know that they have a voice, that they're valued, and that they're respected. And usually those play out negatively in a meeting environment. So that was one of our approaches on looking at small acts of inclusions. And we do have quite a few more programs, and I think we'll go through them as you ask further questions.
Okay.
No, that was really well said. You know, from a Boeing perspective, we actually have sort of a slogan where we say, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And so thinking about it from that perspective, you know, diversity takes on many different flavors. Obviously, there's ethnic, gender diversity, there's geographic diversity, there's generational diversity, and then there's functional diversity. And so thinking about it from all four of those dimensions, Boeing really targets programs that addresses one and all of those dimensions. So for instance, when we're talking about ethnic and gender diversity, we have what we call affinity groups, which are enterprise-wide, but also have individual locations at each of our sites that ultimately get rolled up at an executive sponsorship level. When we're talking about generational diversity, we have some very unique organic initiatives that we've created across the site. One is called the Da Vinci Summit, for instance, which is our own in-house career development conference that brings together folks from all different sectors of the company in age, in function, and really focus on career development as really an accumulation of skills and values and perspectives over time. And as one has that toolbox that's sort of rich enough, they transform into a Renaissance member of the Boeing community. Another really interesting program we have is what we call the Mentoring on Rotation experience. This is a program where every 6 months, employees are partnered with mentors or proteges from across the enterprise. And every 2 weeks, they meet and talk about anything and everything they want to talk about, whether it's their individual careers, work-life balance, educational opportunities, technical excellence, business acumen, the state of the company, you name it. And the program really incentivizes folks to come together for various programs, various events, and various activities. And each participant actually gets points for attending any number of these events. And at the end of the 6 months, they graduate from the program and are recognized from our executives and their executive sponsors. So these are just sort of a sample of the different types of programs that we're uncovering at Boeing. But I think from a diversity perspective, you're really there as an organization, as a community, as a society when, sure, you have individual programs that you can point to and say, we're being very diverse and inclusive there, but it really happens at an organic bottoms-up level through the day-to-day interactions at a one-on-one basis. And bringing those values to the forefront is really what makes an organization truly diverse.
Yeah, that was well said. I love the part about the organizational, functional. It covers many different aspects. From my perspective, you're going to get a perspective from a kind of a technical leadership aspect and building an organization that is diverse directly. I think, you know, one of my primary engagement points are we call them ERGs, employee resource groups. Sounds like the Infinity groups at Boeing and most large companies has something like that. We participate in speed mentoring activities, which connects across generations, as well as different ethnicities and backgrounds and functions. We also have rotation programs for, in particular, the junior engineers to try out different functions and understand what they're interested in. We also have structured mentoring programs where we put together a diverse group of folks that are paired with one of our leadership team members for extended mentoring throughout the year. And so I'm I'm very much a proponent of building diverse teams. I think it's a business imperative. I think it's just a personal, human thing that we need to promote. And so I think I'll stop with that.
Okay. Since this is a manufacturing conference, did want to ask specifically about the different disciplines across your companies. Is it easier or harder to achieve diversity and inclusion in a manufacturing workforce versus, let's say, an engineering workforce or other workforces within your companies? What's your observation been?
Well, with the Northrop Grumman, I would tell you it's a challenge just across the board over all disciplines. Because if you think about the HR dynamics, usually that is flooded with females versus males. In the manufacturing, you have more males than females, but also in engineering, that's another challenge. So we look at it from a totality, looking at the total dynamics of our workforce and see exactly where we can find that balance and leverage it at. That's why we go and support a number of conferences across the country to help us seek those diverse populations or those demographics or people that we're trying to target. So if you think about SWE, the Society of Women Engineers, we partner with them to make sure we can go out there and recruit some of that diverse talent. We look at BEA, the Black Engineer of the Year Awards. We look at NSBE, SHIP, HENAC, a number of organizations that we partner with because we know in order to find that talent, we have to go where they are. So we also have 26 universities that we partner with to seek that talent. But if you think about the balance in manufacturing, there is an imbalance, but in engineering, it's probably even greater. So we partner with a lot of the local community colleges to help try to get that as a pipeline to help feed those jobs in that workforce that we have and the demand that we need. But it is a challenge, and the only way we're going to get around it is making sure we're taking proactive measures. If we think about the Northrop Grumman Foundation that we have, over $15 million we spend a year, 50% of that spend goes to STEM-based programs K through 12, just because we have to start earlier than at the college level if we want to get the mindset of the young people, especially our females, to take on more technical roles and looking at the manufacturing environment. Yes.
Absolutely. Really well said. I think there's challenges when it comes to diversity across the board in engineering. Yeah. You know, we talked about women in STEM, you know, low income, first generation, underrepresented minorities in STEM. I think there's a number of different dimensions. Having said that, I think some of the unique challenges with manufacturing are that the one element of manufacturing is, especially for companies like ours, is we're tied to the factory floor. And so what does the factory floor of the future look like in terms of the smart factory, Internet of Things, having greater degrees of automation and robotics? And so from that perspective, somebody who maybe worked on the factory floor and was ensconced in manufacturing 20, 25 years ago really had to focus on one or two disciplines. The individuals of tomorrow that are going to be working on the factory floor have to really be looking at this from a completely multidisciplinary perspective. Mm-hmm. And so that's why diversity is even more important moving forward in manufacturing, because you want to have those individuals that come from diverse enough backgrounds and perspectives to be able to put that associational thinking together, of taking concepts from a discipline and another discipline and bringing them together to bring innovative solutions to the forefront. And that really happens with diversity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think traditionally, culturally, that it is probably true. Your statement is true that it has been more difficult slightly in manufacturing. I can say that I'm really happy with what I see. I was looking at our Raytheon vice president panel for operations. Out of 5 vice presidents, 3 of them are women. I look in my organization, and we're in the low double digits in my organization. 30 to 40 folks. We're about 40% women on my leadership team and about 30% overall. And when I look at the high school students we're bringing in for our STEM events, it's at least half and half, which is awesome to see. Because that's what it is from a demographics perspective. And so we're starting to get some of those brilliant minds that may not have gone into engineering and STEM activities coming forward. And we're going to be able to bring those into our organization later on.
And just to add to that, it's really important from a Boeing perspective, as we're as involved as Northrop and Raytheon, and I really see us as partners in the community because we're all working together on the STEM pipeline and pathway issue. So competition aside, we're collaborators in this space, truly for the benefit of society. And I think that from a manufacturing perspective, one of the areas that we've really focused on with our STEM engagements, with the local universities, with the local schools, is really putting together hardware-centric programs as well. I think that there's been a great push in the last several years in coding and software, and having students sort of understand the software side of it, but that needs to be coupled with an understanding of hardware as well. And so I think that's really where we've tried to focus as well our efforts on, is to say how vital manufacturing is moving forward. And so when students can make that connection of, aha, manufacturing is actually very much tied to engineering and they're embedded together, that's really when the light bulbs go off and the inspiration takes off.
Yep, agreed.
Very good. Herb, you mentioned something about culture. How have each of you seen the culture in your companies change to accommodate this? Because one of the biggest things that I've read about over the years is the retention of diversity in the workforce. It's one thing to get to be challenged with the recruiting, and feeding the STEM pipeline is very good. But what do you do to increase retention?
Well, first of all, let's touch base on the culture aspect, because as I said earlier, we're trying to build the best culture. And when you take 84,000 people and try to align them to one concept and bring them under the fold of saying this is what we want our company to stand for and what we represent, that's a challenge in itself. But then you think about the retention aspect to tack that on, that's a bigger problem. So I'll take the culture piece first, because we have a program that we called Men Advocating Real Change, which we feel that if we target our executives to help them, to give them the resources and tools to help roll out this program and initiative that we're focused on right now, it will help in the workplace to help develop that culture. But we know that anything you do is leadership by example. The leaders have to set the best example first and foremost for all the employees and team members to follow. So right now we target our middle level managers to make sure they clearly understand. If you think about the unconscious bias and how those could play out in the workplace, that's one of our biggest initiatives right now, is focusing on unconscious bias and making sure our leaders are in tune with their biases. People believe that they don't have biases, but trust me, you have bias. Every single one of you out here today, if you have a brain, you have a bias. And it's sometimes natural, sometimes it's known and unknown, and you have to be in tune with it. So we have to start with our leaders, and that's what we're doing now when we want to shape and develop our culture. When you think about retention, I'm actually on an action team that's focused on development as well as retention, because that's one of our biggest concerns. There's a war for talent right now. And if you have a clearance, you basically can write your own ticket with any company, pretty much. And so what we find is our employees are just literally being recycled amongst these three companies that's represented right here. Boeing, they go to Boeing, leave Boeing, go to Raytheon, leave Raytheon, and come right back to Northrop Grumman. So we have to figure out a way to tackle that problem, and it has to be in a more collaborative spirit so we can make sure our employees are comfortable staying. But one of the things we have noticed is that now that we don't have a pension program like we used to for our senior employees that are there, there's no real hook to make an employee that wants to stay unless you build a culture that says, I'm absolutely proud to be a part of the Northrop Grumman family, and there's nothing that's going to make me walk away. And that's what we're trying to cultivate in all of our employees. We want them to feel valued, respected, and most importantly, that they have a voice. The one thing that we hear back in our surveys all the time is that they don't feel like they have a voice, and we have to make sure that their voices are heard, because that's part of the culture building that we're trying to have at Northrop Grumman. So those are two things, but when we think about that retention, that dynamic is tough. With the need for clear talent and the ever increasing amount that companies are willing to pay, employees have very limited loyalty and they will walk away. So you have to provide some other measures to keep them to stay and want to be a part of the family.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. You know, culture engineering is in many ways the most challenging engineering moving forward. And for a company like Boeing, I think we've seen a revolutionary change in terms of the fabric of the company even the last 5 years. And that really factors into our culture. Number one, we're more global and will be more global than ever. Our CEO likes to say that 80% of the people in the world have yet to fly on an airplane. And so just thinking about that from a Boeing perspective, commercial airlines primarily, just the ability for us to be more global and understanding a global mindset, other cultures, other languages, dialects, customs is going to be imperative for us to do business. The second big stat, and you touched on this a little bit, is retention and really the face and identity of the employee moving forward. It used to be in traditional aerospace that you started, you stayed.
Yes.
30 years, 35 years, 40 years with one company because you had the pension plans.
That's right.
You had things that were very clearly laid out. Now we're finding, obviously with a millennial mindset, access to information, the opportunities for wanting to engage in experiences, testing your horizons. That is no longer the case. And furthermore, those pension plans of the 80s and 90s no longer exist. So how do we build in a culture of dealing with a new generation, especially when in our industry, where you talk manufacturing specific or engineering, there are upwards of 50% or greater folks that are eligible to retire in the next 3 to 5 years. So there's a radical shift in what the engineer of tomorrow is even going to look like in these companies. And so with that, the question then becomes, what are you going to do about it? And there's a couple of things that we've targeted. Number one, our CEO is relentlessly passionate about culture and changing the culture at Boeing. We've instituted what we call the 7 Boeing behaviors of what it means to be Boeing and really bleed Boeing internally. And we've really institutionalized those behaviors and really empowered our employees to embody it and really identify with it at a grassroots level. But from a programmatic standpoint, we have something that we call the Boeing Leadership Center. And this is actually a cottage that we have a full campus in St. Louis. It's almost Boeing University, if you will. And this is an opportunity for our early career, mid-career, late career participants and stars, high potential folks to go and take classes on a periodic basis and learn about things like diversity, being global, being empathetic towards people. And that's really been a very transformational experience. We also have individual high potential programs that are targeted to certain individuals in the company where they get the opportunity to swap jobs for 6 months with others and really get a breadth of perspective, geographic and functional. And then finally, we have, from a retention perspective that we're really passionate about, is what we call our Learning Together program. And that's the opportunity for any employee to get $25,000 a year in tuition that Boeing is going to pay for any graduate degree, any certificate, because ultimately, when you talk about culture, you talk about retention, it is a moving ball down the field. It's not static. Really, the employees of the future that are going to be most engaged are the ones that learn how to learn. And so learning is really critical to culture and engagement for us.
I think these guys covered it quite well. I guess it's the only thing I could add is I think my observation over the last 18 years in the company has been how mature the conversations have gotten versus the original, I would call them surface training and surface conversations. You mentioned bias and the different types of bias. Our diversity and inclusion training starts talking about that now, and they actually start to go through some of the social science so people have the tools as leaders to understand how to engage with folks and be self-aware of how we interact with people. And also at a leadership level, I feel like the conversation is much more open and honest. Still got a long ways to go, and it's still a touchy subject no matter what, because we're dealing with human emotions and bias. But I have seen that conversation change over the last 18 years, which I'm very happy about.
Okay, so at this point, if there's any questions from the floor, I know Susie has a mic over there. I welcome any. I see some hands up over there in the back, Susie. Give you guys a break for my questions.
So all the great things that you mentioned today,
Okay.
I'd like to know how you support your supply chain to achieve the same thing. Because of course, when you've got small business who's trying to achieve exactly the same things that you at billions of dollars are achieving, we're put to the test on an Excel sheet for a price. And we're not considered to be including that because that's probably the most expensive cost of our business is training from fundamental, in my case, machining, to make the parts that fit your quality team's expectations. So I want to know, are you getting into the grassroots of your supply chain to help train them, help support their training and teaching?
Good question.
So I'll go for it.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, my friend.
So I'll take the first pass at that. It's a great question, and it's a very profound one, actually. And what we really are looking at moving forward is thinking of our suppliers as partners. And so that's really critical. I think in the past, the OEM supplier relationship has been very myopic. It's been very transactional. It's the exchange of money for goods. Let's not really have a conversation. I want A, you want B, let's swap, and let's move on with our lives and have a certain timeline and meet our deliverables. Moving forward, that can no longer be the case. We have to think of our suppliers as partners for the simple reason of the pace of technology moving forward. And regardless of whether you're talking about satellites or missiles or airplanes or anything else that our companies are working on, the emphasis on modularity, scalability of design, and the ability to kind of plug and play with different pieces of subsystems becomes very apparent. And so when that fundamental architecture changes and that mentality changes of how you design products, your relationships with your suppliers ultimately need to change as well. And you can no longer think of your suppliers as the widget maker. It's a partner that will engage with one another to help put a solution together. And I think as we go down the future and see how technology is evolving and continues to evolve, that will be more and more the case. And we're already looking at things from that perspective, and there's more work to be done. Sure, absolutely.
Hi, good afternoon. Alex Cintron with Raytheon. So I guess question for Boeing and Northrop. All great ideas, all great projects, and I've got a lot of experience into how that goes well at the top layer and your executives, and they're all passionate and yes, let's go do it. How do you break those barriers and actually get to your middle management, which are actually the folks that can make the impact to the, let's just call it worker bees, the engineers, like that level? What is your approach? And if you can speak to maybe some tangible things that have been effective rather than just your corporate slogan type of comment.
Yeah, that's actually a great question because initiatives always start at top, and the VPs are going to buy in, but it is filtering that information down to the middle managers. So if you remember earlier, I had mentioned how we're targeting middle managers. May 15th through the 18th, we're hosting, very similar to my peers here, we host a conference for a population of people. So we call it the Inclusive Leadership Conference. It's May 15th through the 18th in Virginia, and our target area is the middle manager. So we're inviting them all out. We're going to have 3 days of just diversity, inclusion, driving more inclusive behaviors in the workplace, and get them an understanding of why it's critical and important to our success as a company. Middle managers are always about the mission, trying to get things accomplished, so they miss some of those side things where you as an employee may be a part of an employee resource group and all very excited, but yet your manager may not be on that same sheet of music. So trying to get them in tune and in line and get a better understanding of what the company's objectives and goals is our target at our Inclusive Leadership Conference. So that's one thing we're going to use as a mechanism to target that audience, because if we don't have them on board, they can't set the best example for the employees to lead. For the employees to follow. So that's a challenge for us. Believe believe it or not, you're not alone, because a lot of our ERG members, we have 12 employee resource groups at Northrop Grumman, and they're highly engaged, very active, and they drive the productivity within Northrop Grumman. We couldn't accomplish a lot of the things that we accomplish right now without the employee resource group members. So they're very vital to our success. So trying to keep them motivated and yet make sure they have managers that are leading them that are motivated and understand the dynamics of diversity and inclusion is something that we're working on, and we're going to start that with our Inclusive Leadership Conference. Now, we've hosted this conference for 6 years, so every year we bring in a different pool of people. This year we talked about 450 people. We have the middle managers as well as our employee resource group leaders. Yep.
You know, and just to add to that, it's a really astute observation that you brought up, the power of the middle. And I think part of it has been learning for us as an organization that we need to invest more resources and programs and time into the middle. And part of it is, again, kind of this evolution of what aerospace has looked like from the past to now. Historically, what we found is that folks that got into aerospace, and you know, they could hop around between sort of our companies and what have you, but there's an inflection point where about 5 or 6 years, they either decide they're aerospace lifers or they want to go into a different industry. And so as a result of that, a lot of, I think, our companies had really a great deal of emphasis on the early career, quote unquote, and having resources and programs really invested to make sure that they understood the power and opportunity that they had in their current positions and in their current environments. And then conversely, the thinking was, well, if they cross that 5 or 6 year hurdle, they're going to be here 30 or 40 years. And then there's sort of this emphasis on building your leadership pipeline. But that's more sort of second half of one's career. And so over time, those were really the focus areas. And what we realized through some very dedicated analysis, surveying, pulsing our audience is that there's a gap in the middle. And so, and in many ways, middle management serves the function of what graduate students serve in a university. You know, graduate students do the research, the teaching, and their students, they're the lifeblood of a university in many ways. Middle management is the lifeblood of a company in many ways. And that's what we realized. And so, obviously, I talked about a number of programs that Boeing is doing, but there's an overall just emphasis and mentality of investing in the middle.
We have time for one more question.
Hello, I'm a retired Boeing employee. So on the subject of diversity and inclusion in manufacturing, you have a lot of great programs, you're working from the top to the middle management. Are you surveying your employees and asking your employees how well you're doing with diversity and inclusion programs? And if you are, how are you reacting to that data?
What was the question?
Yeah, I didn't catch the end of the question.
Did you hear it?
Here.
I didn't.
Just the end of the question, can you repeat?
Just the end, if we could.
If you are surveying your employees,
Yes.
how are you reacting to the survey data?
So at Northrop Grumman, we have what we call the Willis Towers Watson survey that we implement annually across the entire enterprise and ask all our employees to give us feedback. So out of that came the Diversity and Inclusion Councils. As you remember, I mentioned earlier, we have what we call the D&I councils across every one of our sectors, where we take that feedback and we try to go implement programs and change. So two populations that we heard from, well, actually 3, loud and clear, was our LGBT community, our people with disabilities community, as well as our white males. So we take the feedback from the survey to go actually implement action plans and teams so we can address those issues and concerns. Our LGBT community felt like they were not truly, they didn't feel like they were absolutely included as part of the family because they are different. People think that they're significantly different, and that's not the case. We want to bridge that gap. So we heard them loud and clear. Our people with disabilities, we have to go and implement things within the workplace to help them. If you've never had a challenge of navigating a door, just imagine a person in a wheelchair walking up to a door to go navigate it. So one of our first programs that we implemented across the AS sector, and lucky for me, my VP is here. He was one that's going to roll it out. We've done it over the last 2 years. And it seems like a simple change, but if you think about in the manufacturing environment, a lot of our sites and plants are old, 30, 40 years old, and guess what? They're grandfathered in a lot of the ADA compliance, but we have to bring them up to date. So we decided to go implement a push to open door on every one of our buildings to make sure our people with disabilities is accommodated. Now, while you think maybe that should be obvious, but if you think about the dynamics of one door to get in a building, and then you still have to navigate inside. So we heard loud and clear from our survey about that population of people. So we take action immediately when we hear the feedback to go impact change, because if we truly want to build the best culture, it takes us to listen first, act second.
The one thing I'd add to that is, obviously there's kind of quarterly surveys, annual surveys, but what we really try to do, especially in manufacturing and on the factory floor, is come up with feedback mechanisms on a weekly and bi-weekly basis. And so kind of take some of the approaches from the automotive industry on how they kind of look at lean manufacturing and processes, but actually apply it to employee feedback. And so the ability for employees to feel empowered enough to say, I either see a gap in a process on the factory floor, or I see a gap in terms of employee engagement, culture, diversity, inclusion for myself and for those that I work with. And so the results of that have been really positive, where we collect them on a weekly and bi-weekly basis, and with the goal of really putting together solutions in a rapid turnaround fashion. So in no more than a few weeks, if we see a gap where, folks on the manufacturing floor don't seem like they're getting enough career opportunities or visibility into other functions, let's go create a series of talks around that, or let's go inject them into an existing program. And likewise, we really tried to become much more agile in our thinking around employee engagement.
I don't think I have anything to add on the survey part of it. I think, from my engagements with our ERGs, that's been one of the greatest benefits of those, is to actually engage with those boots on the ground employees. In fact, we just made an offer to somebody that I met a year and a half ago in one of the ERG speed mentoring events. So I've made numerous connections that way from a leadership perspective, being able to connect with some of the boots on the ground.
Okay, the last thing I would ask you to do, each of you, is an elevator speech. You're in the elevator with your CEO, and they say to you, I heard you were on this panel at AeroDef, and you did a great job on the panel, and all of you did, by the way. I want to ask you, what is the one thing we need to do to improve diversity, and what's the next thing we have to do to improve diversity and inclusion in our company? So each of you, an elevator speech. You're with Dennis, Kathy, or Tom, one of them. You look like you're ready, Kelly. No?
To be honest with you, most of our initiatives and programs come from the corporate office, which is driven by our CEO. Okay. So for me to say there's a 30-second spiel, I don't think I have one, because guess what? My executive, Kathy Warden, is all about diversity and inclusion and driving that change and building that culture that we're looking for. So I think all the things have already been set in place to help us move forward in the right direction to build the best culture. But one thing we don't do is mandatory. We don't mandate a lot of the stuff. And if I had to do a spiel, it would be around saying we need to make these mandatory required courses for leaders, as opposed to saying that this is the tools and resources we have available. But I don't think there's anything that I don't think we're doing in the right direction that says I have to have a 30-second speech.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you, Herb.
I would say, as a company, oftentimes we're very product focused, we're very process focused, but we need to be just as much, if not more, people focused. Because ultimately, our people are our very first customers, as Richard Branson says. And any collection of organizations and business units is only as strong as its people. And so whenever folks sometimes ask about diversity and inclusion, the question becomes, okay, how much is that going to cost? Or how much time am I going to need to invest? And so the question needs to be changed, not just how much is it going to cost to do this, but what is it going to cost us if we don't do it?
I agree on the systems part of it. I think we do have a lot of systems in place that is developing that pipeline. One thing I would say is to continue engaging with personal conversations on the ground, develop those relationships. And if you have that relationship with a person of color, a female, LGBTQ, disability, have a personal conversation to understand their journey. And I think there's not much else, not much better that can help shape how you think about diversity than to have that conversation. You can't just open it up to anybody that comes through the door. It'd be a little awkward, but it's part of developing personal relationships with people and treating them as human beings and really understanding who they are and where they came from.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'd like the audience to please thank Kelly, Jamal, and Herb for being on our panel today.
Thanks.